Let's apply common sense, logic, and wisdom as to how we can evaluate a camera as to what it's best for. Specifically, this is talking about camera weighting, something that none of the other YouTube channels on photography have talked about before, and you're going to actually get something out of this if you bear with me briefly. And of course, you've heard this, and I've heard this countless thousands of times when we actually talk about a new camera, or this camera, that camera. Someone will say, countless thousands of people will actually say, well, my camera can do that too. So, well, you can also haul potatoes in your Lamborghini if you had one, but it's not a wise idea. You could technically, drive a gigantic earth mover on the freeway if it were legal, but it wouldn't be any good for that. I mean, the maximum speed is 25 miles per hour, and it gets about the really giant ones, the ones you actually have to climb up 2 sets of stairs to get into the driving compartment. I think they get like 2 miles per gallon. So there's what something is ideal for and what it's designed for. And I'm going to show you something, and these are the considerations. And there's really only 6 criteria. I've actually got 3 clocks, if you will, here at 6 different positions. 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and 10 o'clock. And there's 6 different ultimate criteria of any and all camera. It doesn't matter if it's crop sensor, or micro four thirds, or medium format, and FX. And it is true that depending on the type of photography we're talking about, one camera could be way better simply based upon its ecosystem, meaning the lenses that it has available for it. For example, for certain types of product photography, and specifically, definitely so, architecture, and a small spectrum, relatively small spectrum, of landscape photography, Canon and Nikon owns it. Why do they own it? Because Fujifilm nor Sony nor Olympus have a tilt-shift ecosystem of lenses. Tilt-shift lenses are incredibly important for architecture. When you want to do a brochure and you don't want, the buildings coming to an apex, and you actually want to do perspective control, these are perspective control lenses, Canon and Nikon absolutely owns it. And this is the only arena in which full-frame cameras actually own it over everything else, including medium format, unless it's some older medium format systems. I know Fujifilm's working on a tilt shift lens for the GFX system. It doesn't exist yet. We're talking about some older medium format stuff back in the day when there was plenty of film tilt shift lenses. And also, too, this is another reason why you would say, for example, use a GFX camera using a 4x5 large format lenses. You can actually stick it on a bellows system and do some hardcore tilt shift perspective control stuff, but it's a huge rig, it's really expensive, and it's a gigantic titanic pain in the ass. So let's talk about the 6 criteria of camera weighting, and then we'll actually understand something, and then we'll actually make some parameters of comparison, and I'll actually show you the vectors where each one of these cameras spike relative to another, based upon like a Nikon D500, which I have, a D850, a D5, a D6, an X100 series Fujifilm, a GFX 50S and a 50R, or a GFX 100, for example, or the new XT4 versus the XT3. So I actually have 3 clocks up here, and they're all the exact same parameters at 12, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 o'clock. And these 6 criteria are the 6 criteria for camera design that will actually dictate what this camera is going to excel at or absolutely not excel at. Let's actually take a look at 12 o'clock. That's SWWAP. For all intents and purposes, these 4 criteria, these 5 criteria actually fit within the same parameters, so they can actually be one position. This is sports, wildlife, wedding, action photography, and photojournalism. And there is some crossover between these sections, but essentially there are 6 distinct groups. And let's go over to L and A. This is landscape and architecture. And this is where we're talking. This is, of course, where full frame is better than crop, and crop is better than micro four thirds. It's not to say you can't do landscape photography with a crop sensor camera. The question is not what the hell you can do, but what is best at, or what is most ideal. And obviously, we could take a guess at where medium format would be in this criteria. And LL, this would be low light, no flash photography, low light, high ISO. There's a lot of places like wedding ceremonies and whatnot we actually can't use flash photography. So low light, high ISO condition. and no flash photography, like inside of a club or at a rock concert, so on and so forth. Down here at 6 o'clock, we actually have portraiture. I think that's self-explanatory. Over here, we actually have street. And street, of course, would also be the first two letters of stealth. Street photography, which is also should be ideally so, at least it is in most cases. Stealth photography, which, you know, like a medium format camera with its large shutter, a Nikon D5 with this loud shutter, excuse me, or a Nikon D5, D6 is not ideal for street photography. It's not saying you can't do it with those cameras. And over here at the 10 o'clock, we actually have product photography. Also, too, this is part of an ecosystem with lenses. By the way, the best macro or portrait lens depends on the size of the product, too. Taking pictures of watches is product photography just as much as it is taking pictures of Lamborghini cars is also product photography. So we're also talking too about the lens ecosystem. And since the parameters for product photography are 99.999% of the time under control of the photographer, the necessity for croppability is not a concern because you frame things properly, you set up your lighting, you do a lot of planning. So, product photography. Now let's actually get to the important part. Remember, this is camera weighting. When I say weighting, I don't mean the weight of something or how heavy it is. It means what is these cameras, and I'm just going to use these as an example. I could use countless other cameras. What are these cameras weighted for? In other words, what are they designed for? It's like, well, why does Nikon need all these damn cameras? You know, why do they need 10 models for this? And, well, you know, in many cases they don't need that many models. But why does Fujifilm? You know, why do they have an X100F? It uses the same one. And why do they have, you know, an X Pro 3 instead of like an XT3? I get asked that same question all the time. Well, I mean, the X Pro 3 is it a digital rangefinder style camera? It specifically is designed for travel and or street photography. Now, so far as the camera design, travel should almost kind of be up here as a 7th position, but it's not. I mean, it's minimalistic. A lot of these are lap over from each other to a certain degree, but there's these 6 distinct character points of camera weighting. So let's stop shooting around the, you know, shooting the nonsense here, and actually let's take a look at a vector of like a Nikon D500 or a D850. However close I get, this would be a D500 here, and let's take a look at the D850 over here. However far I go from the center point here is however good is a descriptor of how well that camera excels or how well it is weighted for that vector of use. I've got a couple Nikon D500s and I'm actually filming this video on a Nikon D500 now. So for sports, wildlife, I swear to God, every bird photographer on earth has got a Nikon D500 and 200, 500 Nikkor. For bird photography, for sports, wildlife, not so ideal for wedding, but really good for same. For sports, wildlife, wedding, action, and photojournalism, the Nikon D500 would have about this vector. For product photography, not that you can't do plenty great with product photography, it's somewhere right around there. For street photography, right about there. Portrait photography, crop sensor is less ideal. However, you can do perfectly fine photography with any crop sensor camera. I'm not saying you can't, obviously so. I'm saying not what you could do with it, but what is most ideal. What is the camera weighted best for? You know, you're not going to buy a giant earth mover that gets 2 miles to the gallon to do the same thing you're going to buy a Lamborghini for, and you don't buy a Toyota SUV for what you buy one of those little tiny smart cars you see on the street that looks like a matchbox on 4 wheels. These have different intents of design for different end user use. You know, the farmer that buys a pickup truck to haul his turnips and melons around is not the same as the dude that's going to buy a compact Camry that lives in downtown San Francisco, right? Same is true of cameras. Now for low light, actually D500 is excellent, even though it's been bested. For low light, it's way out here, really good. For landscape and architecture, not so good. So here you can actually see the vectors of a Nikon D500 for sports, wildlife, wedding, action, and photojournalism. For landscape and architecture. For low light club photography, so on and so forth. For portraiture, for street. So you can actually see this 6-pointed star for what the camera is weighted for use. Now let's take a look at the D850, which most people agree, and I was the first person to say this on YouTube. D850 is the best all-around friggin' do-it-all camera for basically everything. It's kind of the jack of all trades and the master of all trades. Not absolute master, but for that, we have that. For product photography, we actually have that. For street photography, not ideal. For portraiture, oh yeah. For low light, pretty damn good. Not as good as a Nikon, D5 or Nikon D6, which I assume that D6 has since has the same sensor as a Nikon D5, even though the image processing can be slightly different, even have up to nearly a stop. Better low light high ISO performance due to signal processing in the firmware and on the main board, and it's really good. Now for landscape architecture, awesome. So now look at the vectors, the 6-pointed star. I forgot street photography. Sorry about, no, I didn't forget street photography. There we go. Not so good. Actually, it should be like right around that for street photography. Here you can actually see the 6 vectors of camera weighting for the Nikon D850. Different profile than for that of the Nikon D500. Let's take a look, relatively so, and get this camera. Let's actually eliminate out these 2 cameras and their vectors. So D500 is incredible for all sorts of stuff, and D850 even more so. However, the D850 costs a lot more than the Nikon D500, doesn't it? Yeah, but it's really worth it. The D500 is incredible. So we've eliminated out those now, D500, D850 for descriptors. Now let's take a look at like an X100F. And even though there's performance designs, and I know the improvements, I owned a X100F, and I owned an X100T, and of course the X100V is coming out. Let's take a look at the general profile of an X100 Fujifilm, which is a street camera. Also, too, it has a leaf shutter and has a built-in ND filter, and it can go in completely silent mode. For street photography, is way the hell out here. For portraiture, it's plenty good. For low light, oh god, no. Yeah, I mean, even though it's the same sensor as the XT3, it's not a camera for indoor club, no flash, low light photography. Landscape architecture, well, it's plenty fine enough for doing that. And for travel, it's a perfect little camera? No. For sports, wildlife, wedding, action, and photojournalism, it's actually a cute little camera for photojournalism, but I mean, there's a fixed lens. Let's be perfectly honest here to what it is for the SWWAP vector, which is about like that. For product photography, hell no. So now let's take a look at the vector, 6-pointed vector star for the X100 series of cameras. Yeah, pretty logical, sensible. Form follows function. Form follows function. I don't know how many times I can actually repeat that. Form follows function. Okay, now let's take a look at the perfect, or nearly so perfect, camera, Nikon D5, Nikon D6, same sensor, and I've seen the improvements on the D6. And for swap, SWAP, sports, wildlife, wedding, action, photojournalism, Nikon D5, Nikon D6. All intents and purposes, the exact same camera weighting vectors. Way the hell out here for that. For portraiture, perfectly great. For street, I mean, it's a huge, obnoxious beast. Not to say you can't do all the street photography in the world with it, but is it specifically best for that? Oh, hell no. For low light, club scene, no flash photography, way the hell out here. Absolutely awesome. For landscape, perfectly fine. Is it ideal for that? No. For product photography, there's actually a lot of product photography. Not much croppability, but for product photography, you're setting everything up, so you're not really cropping. 99.9% of instances for all product photography. Plenty good. So now we can actually see the 6-pointed vectored star for the Nikon D5, D6. Awesome for low light, high ISO. Awesome for indoor no flash photography, for weddings and for clubs and for music events, concerts, so on and so forth. Landscape architecture, plenty fine. Ideal? No way. Absolutely best. One could actually say nearly best in the world for sports, wildlife, wedding. I mean, it's designed to be a hardcore bomb-proof beast. The Nikon D5, Nikon D6. I have 2 Nikon D4s. I've loved all the Nikon D series except for the latest ones, really. But no better performer for that. So form follows function. It does exactly what it's designed for, even though I ragged all over the Nikon D6, and so did everybody else. But anybody else logically with a brain will agree that for what it's designed to be, Of course, we waited 5 years with basically no improvement. That's what everybody's griping about. For what it's designed for, it's perfectly awesome. Last, we'll take a look at the XT3, XT4, but let's first take a look, and I have all three of these cameras, the GFX 50S and 50R, and versus that of the GFX 100. So, let's take a look at the GFX 100 here, the world's first IBIS medium format, the world's first fast focusing medium format. Fast as a Nikon D5 or an XT3? No, GFX 100 is roughly as fast as the last firmware update for the Fujifilm XT2. And over here we actually have the 50R and the 50S. For sports, wildlife, wedding and action, and photojournalism? Yeah, no, not really. For product photography? Oh, the hell yes. For street photography? Yes, kinda. Not really. For portraiture? Way the hell out here. For low light? No. For landscape architecture? Way the hell out here. So take a look at these, the 6-pointed vector star on the 50S and 50R GFX medium format cameras, which I have, and also to my GFX 100, which I used for a couple months also, even though I have one now, back in 2019. For sports, wildlife, wedding, and action, more so yes, but it's still a honking beast. It's really not for that. For product photography, oh my god, way the hell out here in outer space. For street photography, more so yes, but I mean, it's still a honking beast, you know, and it's loud, and everybody's going to notice it. For street photography. For portraiture, oh my god, yes. For low light, more so than the 50S or 50R, but no. For landscape architecture, way the hell out here. So now let's take a look at the two relative vectors, 6-pointed star vectors, so the GFX 50S and 50R versus the GFX 100, the 102 megapixel medium format Fujifilm camera, world's first IBIS medium format, world's first fast focusing medium format camera. Take a look at the actual differences. Better for street than GFX 100, better on higher ISO, low light than GFX 50S and 50R. Absolutely incredible for product, absolutely incredible for landscape architecture. So look at the vectors on that. So now let's finish up here and take a look at what we know. We basically know all the important specs of the XT4. People say, why on earth are you calling the... We also know now the specifications released today that the Fujifilm XT4, depending on the lens used, has 6.5 stops, oh my god, of IBIS control. 6.5 stops, that's incredible. So let's take a look over here on the left of the XT3. XT3 versus the XT4. Why am I calling the XT4 a hardcore sports action? Well, the buffer, 15 frames per second, 6.5 stops of IBIS, much larger battery. People don't realize when it actually comes to serious action, like the Olympics, photojournalism, sports, where you're literally pounding the piss out of the shutter release and keeping it held down. While the XT3 is pretty amazing, the XT4 obviously is much, much better. Better, better, better. Or as they say, more better, more better. So, sports, action, wildlife, photojournalism, wedding, XT3. Oh yes, up here. And let's take a look at that same vector for the XT4. Way the hell up here. Yes, much better for that. Same sensor for product photography. It's no better for product photography than the XT3 is. For street photography, when you actually want to capture the action and something really amazing is going on, you want to pound the shutter, and you want better autofocus. We don't know how much better it's going to be. It's going to be some better than the XT3. For portraiture, the XT4 is going to be none better than the XT3. Same sensor, however, we don't know about post-image processing, so we can't say how much better it is than the XT3. That's an unknown quantity. For landscape architecture, no better than the XT3 is. Landscape architecture, well, actually, that's not exactly true, because the fact that it actually has IBIS, if you want to do some low light architecture stuff when the sun's setting, the XT4 is actually going to be better. But I mean, what the XT4 is weighted for, obviously, this is not about video. This is simply about photography, so I'm not talking about video at all here. So the major discrepancy we have between the XT4 and the XT3 is right here. Yeah? More better, more better, more better. This is, because of the larger battery, because of the IBIS, because of the fact that it's got 15 frames per second, because of the fact that it's got, depending on the lens, 6.5 stops of IBIS. This is exactly what I said. People don't understand quite often, which amazes me, what really, really hardcore sports action wildlife camera is, like in the arena of a Nikon D5 or a Nikon D5. It's not to say you can't pound the shutter on a D850 and do action photography. The question is, which one will beat the hell out of the other one, you know? And the Nikon D5 or D6 is going to beat the hell out of the XT3. Nikon D5 is going to beat the hell out of the Nikon D850. D500 is a perfectly great action camera. It's great for wildlife, photojournalism, but there's nobody on earth that knows about these cameras that's going to say, yeah, well, the D5, D6 for hardcore, where you're pounding the hell out of the shutter. And you keep it held down, and you need to keep it rocking, and you need to keep the autofocus rolling the whole time that the shutter is clicking. The D5 and D6 will literally blow the hell and gone out of the D500 and Nikon D850. And that's exactly what the XT4 is relational to the XT3. We have 90% of the specifications essentially now on the XT4 versus the XT3. And the difference is, right, meow, meow, and meow. So there's a logical look at camera weighting based upon the 6 vectors of camera design, and once again, form follows function. And it actually takes a brain to make a chart like this and talk about these cameras logically. Ironically enough, nobody else on YouTube that does stuff on photography actually has approached it in this fashion before, but they should have. They should have, but they didn't. Was that a bit egotistical? It might have been. Nevertheless, it was still accurate. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you got something from this and you understand things a little better. I didn't actually need, ultimately, this third 6-point vector placement over here, but that's okay. Better too many than too few, right? Thank you so much for watching. Bye. Did you ever have a teacher that did this? I had a teacher that did this back in the day. She had one of these little rods, and she'd make the students pay attention. Pay attention! Pay attention, class! You ever have one of those teachers? Crusty old hag, you know what I'm talking about? You know the crusty old hag I'm talking about? Like her pantyhose were rolling down and they're like around her calves, and she gave you that evil stare, and she had a stick and she was always beating the chalkboard. Did you ever have one of those teachers? Pay attention, class!